All right, guys, so moving right along, we are now on the very bottom portion of the first page. So it should look something like this. So you should have two boxes with two chemical equations. And what I want you guys to do here is to just identify the reactants and products in this first box. And then for the second box, I just want you guys to identify the coefficients and the subscripts. So you have your definitions right on top. You should be able to just go back and be able to figure out which ones are which. But the way that you are highlighting in your Google Doc is if you look for this symbol right here, it's like a little marker thing. I'm just asking you guys to highlight in certain colors so that I know that you'll understand which one is which. Okay, so for example, I'm asking you to highlight the reactants in yellow, right? So you would look for this, select the color yellow and highlight the reactants from this equation. And then go ahead and pick blue and then highlight the products in blue from this equation in this first box, okay? Then for the second box, you're doing the same thing, but here I put to highlight the coefficients in purple. Again, using the same tool right here, and then highlight the subscripts in orange, all right? Just so that I know that you understand which ones are the reactants, which ones are the products, which ones are the coefficients, and which ones are the subscripts. Feel free to refer back to your definitions from above to go ahead and highlight the correct parts of the chemical equations. Again, feel free to pause here before you move along. If not, I am going to move on to atom counting. Okay, so this next part of the task is going over the specific rules for learning how to count atoms, okay? So there are three main rules that we need to focus on when we are learning how to count atoms. The very first one is, number one, if there is no coefficient or subscript, meaning the big number or the little number, then you just automatically assume that there is an invisible number one. Okay, so again, if there is no big number or little number, just assume that there is a number one. The second rule is if one type of atom has a coefficient and a subscript, then you're going to multiply both numbers to determine how many atoms there are for that element. Okay, so for example here, I'm just going to show you guys a quick example with hydrogen. So you guys see with hydrogen, there is a coefficient, right, of 2, and there is a subscript of 2. So to figure out how many hydrogens there are in that actual chemical equation, all we're going to do is just multiply 2 times 2, okay? So again, 2 times 2 is 4, so that means that there is 4 hydrogen, okay? The third rule is if there is a coefficient in front of two different atoms, that coefficient is going to apply to both. Meaning, for example, here we have water or H2O. Okay, I'm going to just change the color. Okay, so this coefficient right here, we have a 2, right? This 2 is for this hydrogen, but it also is for this oxygen. All right. The only way that you know that that number is not going to correspond to it is if there is a plus sign or an arrow separating them. Since there is no plus sign or arrow and you know that this is all just one compound, then you know that that coefficient is going to go for both. So the way that we're going to count these atoms, we got to figure out how many hydrogens there are and how many oxygens there are. So because that coefficient is in front of the H, we're going to go ahead and figure out how many hydrogens there are first, okay? So we have a coefficient and we have a subscript. So we automatically know to figure out how many hydrogens, we need to multiply these two. So again, 2 times 2 equals 4 hydrogen. So we know there's 4 hydrogen. Then for oxygen, we see that there is no subscript, right? There's nothing there. So again, we're going to go back to rule number 1. We're going to put an invisible 1, or you can just write a 1 down here. Okay, 2 times 1 is 2. So that means that we have 2 oxygen. So again, 2 times 2 means that there is is 4, right? So that means there's 4 hydrogen. 2 times 1 is 2, so that means that there's only 2 oxygen. And again, we put an invisible 1 because there is no subscript under that oxygen, so we just assume that it's a number 1. All right, so if you are still a little lost, let's just do the first couple examples together so it could make a little bit more sense. All right, so we're gonna move right along to the example. The very first example is gonna look like this. And on your chemistry task number 3, I already gave you guys the answer to that. And it actually looks like this, but I wanna just show you how I got to that, okay? So we are trying to figure out how many carbons there are, so how many C's, right? And how many oxygens. So in order to do that, we need to count how many carbons and how many oxygens there are in this. So we have a coefficient of 2, we have a subscript of 3. So we're gonna figure out which ones, how many of each of those there are. So to figure out how many carbons there are, again, I'm gonna go through this one more time. We have a coefficient of 2. This 2 applies to both of these. It applies to the carbon, it applies to the oxygen, all right? So this does not have a subscript, right? So we're gonna just put an invisible 1 down there. And then we know 2 times 1, right? Times 1 equals 2, right? So we know that there is 2 carbon. So that's how I got these 2 carbon here. So all you're doing is just writing down 2 carbon. Now, for oxygen, we have a coefficient of 2 and a subscript of 3, okay? So what are we gonna do there? We're gonna do 2 times 3 equals 6. So we know that there is 6 oxygen. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so that is why I wrote down 6 oxygen down here. All right, if you need to go back and see how I did that, please rewind the video, pause, whatever it is that you need to make sure that you are getting this. I'm gonna do one more example with you guys, and then you guys will be doing the rest yourself. All right, so the next example that we're gonna be doing is the HNO3, okay? So here we have 3 elements. We have a hydrogen, a nitrogen, and an oxygen, but we only have 1 subscript, okay? So we're gonna figure out how many of them there are. So since there are no coefficients in this one, it's gonna be a little bit more simpler. So we see that there is, we're trying to figure out how many hydrogen atoms do we have? I'm gonna do the same thing. Since there is no subscript or no coefficient, I'm just gonna put an invisible 1. This is a 1 right here. This is a 1 right here, okay? So 1 times 1 is 1, right? That's why we have only 1 hydrogen. Now to figure out the nitrogen, we have 1 times 1 is also 1, right? So we have only 1 nitrogen. Now for the oxygen, we do have a subscript. So we're gonna do 1 times 3 equals 3. So here we have 1, 2, 3 oxygen. All right. So I know on your Google Doc, it's gonna be a little difficult to write down, like make the boxes. Don't feel like you have to make the boxes. All you have to do is just write down the letters. So for example, for this one, I'm just gonna write 1H, right? Because we have only 1 hydrogen. We have only 1 oxygen, but we have 1 hydrogen, 1 nitrogen, and then 3 oxygen. So I'm just gonna write it like that. So again, don't worry about actually making the boxes, just type in the letters of the elements, but write down the correct number for each. So it should look something like this. Again, feel free to rewind, pause, and work through the rest of them. All right, well, I hope this was helpful. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to your chemistry teacher. Just a reminder that all 3 tasks are due by Friday. And I hope you guys are all staying safe and healthy, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.